Well, welcome to another session of Educators Roundtable. Our conversation tonight is going to be about educational equity. And this is going to be a series that we're going to do for the next couple of weeks. Why? Because it's a larger conversation than what we can have in one night, 2 nights, or 3 or 4 episodes. So our conversation is going to be around where are we at right now with educational equity, and what does that look like in the classrooms, in the schools, to our school leaders, to our parents, to our students, to our legislators, and how has it impacted what's happening in our schools today? So much of what we do is based on equity, and our future depends on what type of education that we're providing to our students. So now let's start our conversation. Of course, I have my co-host. So Shannon, how are you?
Pretty phenomenal, Burkett. Thank you for caring enough to ask. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Today's been a pretty good day. It's nice here in the neighborhood in Detroit. How's the weather there in Jersey?
Weather here started out really cold. We were at about 32 degrees this morning. We're up to, I think we went up to like 58 though, so it balanced out. Yeah, but it's been cold past few days. Cold.
It felt like a nice cool 70 here.
Oh, seriously?
My gosh. Yeah. I mean, like it rained, but it felt like a cool 70 here. It was really nice outside.
I think that might be global warming, like that right there. Like we can see it. 70 degrees in Michigan in November.
Like November 17th. Yeah, that's what was happening.
Yeah.
So I know this is like one of the hot buttons since the pandemic. And I think, the conversations with a lot of the workshops and the seminars that I've attended is that the pandemic really just pulled the covers off education and equity. And they looked at it from a perspective that there's a loss of learning, especially when we talk about urban education versus suburban education versus private school. And the bigger picture is there a fix for this? I know there's no quick fix for this. I know a lot of school districts have put a lot of time and money into it, trying to create that equality in education for our students. But I don't think there's a quick fix. I think this is a long-term game plan. What do you think?
So I think a couple of things. One, this is going to be a little bit more intense to talk about than other topics. Two, there's a phrase that I've heard on more than one occasion, and it's when America catches a cold, Black folks catch pneumonia. And whenever something bad or not good is happening, generally speaking, we catch it that much worse. And this pandemic has uncovered, as you said, kind of some of the major inequities, not just as it relates to infrastructure and services and financial supports and policy and every other C in this country. But yeah, I would 100% agree with you, Burkett. It is not going to be a quick fix. And it's going to, I think this is a lot to unpack here today. So yeah, but when America catches a cold, folks of color catch pneumonia.
And I agree with you 100%. I think that before the pandemic, working in urban education, as long as we knew that there were some major inequalities there, just to start off with, and a lot of it, I think, is us ourselves doing it to ourselves in a sense. And I say that from a perspective of one of the major conversations I've had over the past couple weeks, actually for the past year and a half, with school leaders is, okay, we're buying them the technology, but they're bringing it back broken, or they're not using it the way they should be using it. The parent doesn't have the money to repair it, but we know the kid needs it. So how do we you want to balance that? And it's like a balancing act for school districts right now versus suburban schools. They don't have to have, quote unquote, slush fund for laptop repairs versus a lot of the CARES money to subsidize the cost for repairs. So what's your thought on that?
So I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to answer a question that you didn't ask
Mm-hmm.
first, and that is really kind of, let's think around the conditions that cause this, and let's kind of take a step back from and I'm absolutely going to come back to the technology piece, but um, if I come from a home and or a school that doesn't have the resources to put into to really protecting and caring for these devices,
Mm-hmm.
if this is the only thing of value in my home, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole other way we could take that conversation as well, as it relates to, you know, what happens to objects of value in households where resources are limited. But um, I think ultimately, um, you know what, I was at Rick DeForest High School. I don't know, this is maybe 15 years ago, when the
Mm-hmm.
PLC, professional development, was like a thing. It was a school of 5,000 students right outside of Chicago. And for 2 hours on like a Monday, the teachers would come together and they would get into their POCs, and students were in the building largely unsupervised. There were MacBooks and iPods and all that stuff just kind of around, and it was ubiquitous, and no one was stealing, nothing was getting broken, and it was all in. And I said to myself, like, this is America, right? There's so much abundance. There's so much stuff in these kids' lives and their household. Like, this isn't even a thing, right? I mean, it's like a pencil, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pencils aren't being broken and destroyed. They're just tools that we use to write what we need to write. Um, Back to your question around the slush fund and the repair and the CARES Act money. There's such a lack of resource, generally speaking, and there are not enough systems in place to build really the capacity of the structures and organizations to just casually treat these as the tools that they are. And
Mm-hmm.
I think oftentimes we just don't have the capacity built in or the resources built in to support that.
And I agree with you. I think from a much larger picture, when you talk about infrastructure, and the only thing I can say is I spent a lot of time with school districts helping them build out the infrastructure to support the technology that was needed, not only for students, but for staff. And that wasn't just internal infrastructure, that was external as well, because there's a lot of things that go behind this, that comes in behind the scenes, that actually supports, you know, the success when you talk about the need that students have. So on one hand, it was, you know, you need to give certain student tablets, you can give certain students cell phones, you can give certain students Chromebooks. Okay, but all in all, do we need to put apps? And does the app need to have all of the different curriculum in the app so that students can access this? How about offering our students free resources in Khan Academy to help them with after school tutoring if they don't have a teacher that's going to take them step by step? Like, what online tutoring services can we provide to students if our teachers are not available to educate our students? And the other thing is, outside of that, is that I put in a lot of time trying to help them educate the parents, because there's a huge need and support there that normally, and I have to be totally honest with you, there's a lot more work that we have to do in our urban school districts when it comes to parent support than we do in our suburban school districts. Um, and that's just innately so. That's just a matter of fact, right? But the thing is, we still get the same amount of dollars. And that's the problem. We don't have enough dollars to then support the teachers, to support the students, to support the parents, and then all of the additional needs and resources for each student to get the best quality education that we can provide them with, right? That's where we kind of fumble with the ball a little bit.
I don't think we're fumbling with the ball at all. I think it's intentional. I think it's by design, and I think that your zip code uh, will largely determine your success in life. And that having been said,
Mm-hmm.
um, and you said a few things. One, you spoke to the technology. Two, you spoke to curriculum. Three, you spoke to teachers. Those are all resources.
Mm-hmm.
And under-resourced, understaffed, just under-supported schools really don't have those resources. And you also spoke to what I think is probably one of the most important things, and that's really the funding piece.
Mm-hmm.
Equity requires funding at different levels, and equity requires additional funds, additional resources, additional professional development opportunities for teachers, because let's be clear, there are unequal academic opportunities, disproportionately so, for students of color, for students who live in areas of academic need, unhoused students. There are differentials in discipline for those students as well. We know that they are being asked to leave school via suspension and expulsion, and we know the impact that that has on the overall academic profile of any student. So when you put all of those factors together, you get a recipe for disaster for the population that the schools are put here to serve. Now, again, I asked this question: what is the pathology that would allow such conditions to exist? How is it that we, as a free nation, land of the free and home of the brave, have conditions in 2021 that resemble this? I mean, because the conversation that we're having today, we could have been having in 1960.
Yes, and we did have it in 19.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I look back at a lot of different conferences that are available on YouTube, and I looked at some of the conference materials that I had when I was in the classroom, and this is the same exact conversation that we were having then, and we're still having it today. And so the question that I consistently ask, you and I are both working on our PhDs. And it's so funny because mine is in educational psychology and technology. And so I'm looking at the psychology behind education and the ramifications or the impact of technology and how that provides equality in education, right? Because people seem to think or believe that if we all have a laptop, then we all have access to the same information. We should all be learning at the same rate. And I've consistently shared with people, just because you hand them a device doesn't mean that the student still is at the same level of understanding how to use this device in a way that's more suitable for them to close that learning gap. So, for example, we had several students who asked for additional resources, online resources. And then we had an entire group of students who said, how do I download Netflix on my laptop? Right? Because certain things you can block. And that's another thing. That's a whole different conversation. We talk about technology. I talk about that on my tech podcast, where I'm showing districts how to block certain things. You can block Netflix from being uploaded, Hulu, all of those things to keep students from doing those things. But I want us to understand that when you have a group of students, and I know back in the day, we used to put them in cohorts, learning groups, where you would have 4 students collectively working together, and you would have a person who's at higher level, mid-level, and in 2 lower levels. Because collectively, if they're working together, students, and it's been tested, students learn better when they're learning from one another. So when you look at that perspective, it's like, okay, what are we doing to support that? So even now, when we're doing distance learning, we should be creating those little learning pods where you're pairing students up so that they are pulling each other along the way. And I think that would definitely help with a lot of the inequality when you talk about education, because I'm going to think about it from my perspective. My son was at home with an educator. So me being able to help him was different than a kid who went home and his mom was maybe, in a whole different industry, right? She was looking at him like, I've had a hard day. Now you want me to help you with homework? I don't even know anything about algebra. I happen to be a math and science teacher at a high school level. So me helping him was a no-brainer, right? But everyone doesn't have that same type of support. So when we talk about inequality, it's not just that. It's that maybe that parent has just enough money to pay the bills, but they don't have enough money to pay a tutor. So then that adds to the inequality versus another parent in another financial bracket. They have the resources, right? So those are the things, we need to look at, from a different perspective. But before we go too much further in, what I want us to do is to take a look at, and give me 1 second. I'm famous for multitasking, right, Shannon?
Oh, very much so. Very much so.
Very famous for that multitasking. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to share with you guys the information that we pulled together when it comes to education and equity and the learning that's lost. One of the things we want to take a look at is having a better understanding of what it is that we're talking about. So is education equal in America? So right now, all kids living in the United States have the right to a free public education. And the Constitution requires that all kids be given equal educational opportunity, no matter what their race, ethnic group, religion, sex, or whether they are rich or poor. That's what we say education is in America. But Shannon, do you think we're upholding to that?
So first off, you just quoted the Constitution, which was a document that was written when we weren't even considered people. We were counted as 3/5 of a human being for the purposes of bolstering the population of the southern states. However, we weren't even people when this document was written. And largely, we are not viewed as human beings today, as evidenced by the treatment of Black men, Black women, in every single instance of police brutality that you could envision. And I think that, and I go back to the pathology of the minds of the people that don't realize that, yep, we are human beings. We are part of this country. And you know what? If we benefit, you benefit too. But that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, nope, that's what the Constitution says. And that's how it should roll out. But unfortunately, that is not the case in most instances.
And I agree with you 100%, because when you look at when it says opportunity, no matter what their race or ethnic background, religion, sex, or whether they are rich or poor, they're saying it should all be the same. So I always ask myself this question. If it takes another person more time to read what I just read, what is that? What do I need to do to support that? Right? So the one thing that I always feel like is missing in this is that differentiated instruction or additional time, no matter how they learn, the time that it takes for them to learn. I feel like that's missing in this.
And you know what? And really, and you're so right in that. And this doesn't speak to mindset either, or bringing an asset-based mindset to the conversation. However, yeah, I'm just starting to get a little emotional, Burkett. I really am, because I'm and I think about school funding, and in New York, I think about how schools on paper, as it relates to funding is concerned. You know, we got this weighted system where if you are a student of color, unhoused, special ed, you get twice as much money. A school gets twice as much money to educate that student on paper, right? I think about what Proposal A was supposed to do in Michigan in reducing the funding gaps.
Yes.
In 1994, when that was voted in. And, you know, I think that these are all on the surface well-intentioned direction, but unfortunately, none of it pans out. And if you talk to folks on the ground doing the work, they'll say this is an unfunded mandate. We're not getting the support for this. And again, it's about the who that we're talking about. We're talking about children of color. We're talking about families that have financial need, and they have consistently not been a priority in this country.
And I agree with you. And it's so unfortunate. This is what our politicians consistently use as the statement to, do they not all have technology? Did we not put funding out there so they can all have devices? What do you mean we're not supporting, you know, education equality?
And no one's having the conversation about internet connectivity, about the infrastructure that's needed in order to really use these devices to their fullest. And what internet connectivity should be a utility, and it should be in everyone's home, just like light and water and gas.
I agree. And that's one of the things that, so when you look at each one of these kids walking through the door, one thing they have in common is that they're coming there to learn. Now, the way they learn is one thing that they may not have in common. So you can't, they're using this one thing from the Constitution to standardize how we teach, but not understanding that it doesn't apply to every student because they did not accommodate the type of student in the way they learn. So when we talk about educational educational equity, also referred to as equity in education or equality versus equity. So when you look at their definition, equality in education is achieved when students are all treated the same and have access to similar resources. So what do you think about that? When they say all students are treated the same and have access to similar resources.
I got to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
It Words like equity and equality have largely become buzzwords, and
Mm-hmm.
they are largely applied to those that don't live equal or lives that would really show that. So
Mm-hmm.
um, again, I hear equality, and I think about who this equality is meant to protect and serve, and I think about the quality of the teachers that those students have. I think about the
Right.
resources that those schools have access to. I think about the professional learning. I think about the community that those schools are in. I think
Mm-hmm.
about the economic or lack thereof empowerment that the communities uh, may need. And so I think about all of those things. And when you go to equity, and I'm sorry, I'm moving too fast. Go ahead.
No, no, I was going to say equity, and I mean, you can read it. Equity is achieved when all students receive the resources they need so they graduate prepared for success after high school.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to say right now, I have a huge, huge issue with that working in high school. Um, the statement receive the resources they need so they graduate prepared for success after high school. What type of success are you referencing? So that concerns me within itself. This entire, and I just want to say it's a pun to have that teacher clapping her hands, and because of the color that she is, because to them, this we've done this. This is a good job. Like, why aren't you accepting this? We've done a good job. What is the pushback, right?
In some communities, having students of color,
Mm-hmm.
black, brown,
Yeah.
sitting alongside students, uh, white students,
Mm-hmm.
that's it. We've achieved, right?
Yes.
We've made it. But
Yep.
when you start to look at who's achieving and who's not, then you really get a chance to see where the real work is.
And they say, when you look at students from kindergarten to third grade, if a student is not reading at a certain level by third grade, they're automatically starting out behind, right? And they always say, well, what's the problem? That's not our issue. We all have access to the same books. You're correct. The difference is that they probably have two parents working really hard because they're making what one of you make in your household. There are some households where both parents together make $60,000 a year. So you don't understand when, and not, they're not doing, behind, they're not sitting behind a desk. They're doing manual labor. So by the time they get home, they're exhausted, right? And they're trying to put the time in, but they may not have every day that you have to read a story to your kid or read along with their kid or do spelling, or work on grammar. Maybe they have a fifth grade reading level or eighth grade reading level. So all of these things we need to take into account. So when we were talking about earlier about having slush funds for technology, there has to be additional funding and resources to support students who may not have that support at home. But not only that, provide that support to parents. If you find out parents don't have the time to read to their kids, teachers work with your students to find out if you can put them in reading groups after school with other students to try to support that effort. And I know, again, we're putting the onus back on the school, back on the teachers, but we've got to create some type of stability where kids don't have it, and it's no fault of anybody's. I mean, we're just in a situation now where people are just working to survive in so many cases. So we want to try to provide as much support as we can. So when we think about the first is fairness, which implies that factors specific to one's personal conditions should not interfere with the potential of their academic success. This statement is one that I have like a huge issue with because this is what we were just talking about. A person's personal conditions will impact how they learn 100%. We have so many of our kids who are homeless. And it's an anomaly when we have a kid who does really well who has no parental support. They live in a group home. They're coming to school just to eat. And that is going to impact the personal conditions. No, they should not, but they do. So what's our workaround? Because we've already gone against our first thing, which is fairness.
So I want to go back to something that you said a moment ago around the funding piece. I just go back to, and I keep going back to just policy and structures and systems that really intentionally create the necessary supports and foundations to build the capacity to do this work of the people that are doing this work. And that's just not happening. And I think that there are occasional bumps in funding from just, categorical dollars from the federal government. Folks got CARES Act money last year, right? There's some ESSA money, right? And then districts they scramble to, we have to spend this money and we can spend it on these pre-identified things, but ultimately, let's take a look at the policies that allow these conditions to thrive. Let's take a look at the structures within the cities and states and districts that allow these conditions to be the daily reality. And let's really ask ourselves, beyond schools, what kind of structures do we need for communities, for economic empowerment, for families, for let's look at it so much more holistically than the school piece. Now, I know I'm getting ahead of myself. And
no, I agree with you, because we need to take a holistic approach. This is specifically to this personal condition.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It speaks to that.
Yeah.
So no, I'm in 100% supporting everything that you're saying. I mean, I agree with you. We do need to take a different approach when we look at, urban education and how we support it. And that we do need additional dollars. And to your point, it is based on zip code funding. You get more funding based on your zip code. You get less funding based on your zip code per pupil allocation. I mean, and that's just, is it fair? No. And they always say, well, it's due to, our taxes. I think, how can I say? I think that's just a bunch of buffoonery sometimes. So our second important factor is inclusion, which refers to a comprehensive standard that applies to everyone in a certain education system. So translate that, Shannon, because I know what it translates for me. But when it says refers to a comprehensive standard that applies to everyone in a certain education system.
So when I think of inclusion, I automatically think of exclusion. And I think of who's not a part of that conversation. Everyone in a certain, right? Not all, not every. Burkett. Give me your thoughts.
I think when they talk about a comprehensive standard that applies to everyone in a certain education system, I think at that moment when you said certain education system, you just basically divide it. Because it should say education systems in totality, not certain. And that's where it concerns me, because that's when it becomes what? It's not inclusive, it's what?
It's exclusive.
Exactly. And you've quickly identified that. So it just concerns me, because verbiage and how you communicate what it is that you're trying to say is so important. So you've chosen those words intentionally. And you've made it very clear this is not an inclusive approach to how we're trying to educate our students and what we make accessible to our students, because all of us are in certain education systems. That's a fallacy, and it needs to be reviewed. So when you look at these two factors very closely related and depend on each other for educational systems to be successful, and they do. So this is one of the targets of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, in recognition of importance of education and equity. So when I looked at this, I said, United Nations, this is a part of your understanding of what educational equity is? again, it's very disconcerting because I don't think we're taking a holistic approach and really looking at the bullets that fall below this and how it is applied to each of the education learning systems that we have out there. Because we have different systems. Of course, a student who goes to private school is going to receive a different education than a student who's in public school. And a lot of people say, well, they should. And I get it. I paid for private school for part of my son's education. And I get it. My son went to suburban schools. I get that part. But the bottom line is, I still played a factor or role in that, making sure he had what he needed. And I still had to be a supportive parent. Even more so, it was more demanding. I'm going to be totally honest with you than public education. We were required to show up. It was part of our contract for private school. You had to show up for so many events and support the events, or your kid got write-ups, or they weren't allowed to participate in certain things. So I don't know how that works and how you can influence or carry over some of those things into public school, but definitely I think more parent support is needed in that. So when we talk about overall, the growing importance of education equity is based on the premise that individuals' level of education directly correlates to their future quality of life. 100% in agreement with that. 100%.
Well, you said it earlier, right? By the time you're in the third grade, you're on that trajectory. And when you look at the prison population, there's a direct correlation between reading level and education level and who's there, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just don't. I think if you were to look at some federal institutions, there might be a correlation between,
Oh no, they did a study. They did a study between a third grader, mm-hmm. and did predictive analysis to tell you how many of these students are bound for jail.
Yeah.
Third grade.
Yep.
And that was based on a student's reading level and academic core. It was related to
academic.
There's
a relationship.
And I kept saying, are you kidding me? So third grade, you can predict that this student is going to be in jail?
Well, when you get to
or I'm sorry, in jail or at below poverty. I'm sorry, in jail or below poverty as far as economics.
If you can't read, the opportunities to take care of yourself and your family and participate meaningfully in society are quite limited.
Mm-hmm.
Quite limited. Almost non-existent, right?
So, but I guess the question still stands. As much as we hear this in our community, and I know we hear this a lot, I'm very concerned that we're still having this same conversation. This is the same conversation that was being had when my parents were in school. The correlation between the third grade reading level, third grade academic level to people going to jail. But still in the Black, brown communities, it's like, are we hearing this and understanding that we need to put more effort into the education?
I think that the notion of education as liberation is really an idea that cuts across all lanes, right? So first off, to this point, your level of education is directly correlated to your future quality of life. 100% agree with that. But when you talk about people being liberated socially, mm-hmm. economically, and really having the freedoms to live life in the way that we all deserve to, education plays a key role in that. And mm-hmm. I'm talking about some of the mental change that folks are locked in. And you know what? I'm not just talking about those Black and brown students in urban settings. I'm talking about some of those policymakers being educated and really understanding how devastating some of the laws and the ways of viewing students in urban settings mm-hmm. can be.
I agree with you. And I think when I look at the way I was raised, my mom did not go to college. She was a straight A student in high school. In her first marriage, my mother got married straight out of high school, right? Straight A student, she should have gone to college. But her second marriage was really great because when she married my dad, it was just like he was college educated. He talked about walking to Wayne State and how important it was for him to have an education. So for me, it was just like, okay, this is sounded more like what I was thinking, because I was reading history books. And I used to say, well, how did these people have so many degrees when education was so hard to obtain during that time, right? So somebody asked me, well, Christine, you have a bachelor's. I said, you have a bachelor's in chemistry. He was like, and you have 2 masters. Why do you need a PhD? Because to me, the people in the history book who fought for education, who fought for knowledge, I feel like that's part of my legacy. Like, it's up to me to be as well educated as possible in order for me to be a productive citizen and provide whatever I can to bring someone else up, right? And so to me, that's important. And when I look at other people, their attitude is, well, I can make just as much money as you and not have all of that debt if I come up with a great idea and boost it on social media. So now we're competing with that fallacy that you having an education is not, it's not going to give you this lifestyle. Like, there's another way for me to get this lifestyle that I don't have to do what you're doing in order to achieve that. So now you're fighting with that fallacy versus when our parents were growing up, it was either the factory or school. See, now we got not so much the factory because now that's automated, right? So it's not so much the factory. Now it's kind of like education or social media, or you're like an Insta star. That's Instagram. Or you're an Insta star, right? Making millions on an idea or a quick little pop song. So it's like, okay, people, we're fighting with this now. And that's the concern. I've heard students say that to me before. I can go ahead and get my license and be a cosmetologist. I said, okay, but while you're being a cosmetologist, what about owning your own salon? So then you need business acronym, right? You can't just go out and open up a business. Don't you think you need to have like a background in business? Oh no, I can get somebody else. Well, why would you want to pay somebody to run your books? So those are the things I think, I don't know, have we gotten lazier in our concept about what achievement is and how to obtain it and what do we need to be successful?
So I want to take 2 steps back, and I want to say that there is a pretty strong correlation between a mother's level of educational attainment and that of her children, right? And so there's a strong relationship between how far a mom goes in schools, and the correlation is not nearly as strongly related to the father's level of education. It's the mother's, absolutely, right? So when you start to talk about cycles and opportunity, and really there has to be a holistic approach here. And to your point with the Insta stars, there's real money, there's real opportunity, and there are some folks that are becoming really successful. I mean, we see 3 or 4 or 5 of them on the whatever the platform is, right? And that having been said, there's the rest of us.
Right.
And the rest of us are going to have to kind of figure it out, because we although we're exposed to the song, the meme, the thing, the viral moment,
right?
We have a daily life to live,
right?
And I think we have to get grounded in the daily life. The billionaire Warren Buffett said that most people are too and he didn't say lazy,
right?
He didn't. He said most folks. Oh, too impatient.
Yes,
impatient and too impulsive to get rich.
To get rich, and they are. They don't understand
that
the time that it takes. And I'm going to agree with you 100% on something you said as it relates to Insta. And people don't understand. I quantify Insta with the same thing as making it to the NBA or the NFL or NHL. Obviously, I watch a lot of sports. Venus and Serena were like 1 out of a billion people, and they're 1 out of a billion black
and more power to them.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
and I love that they did it.
Like, that's awesome.
But guess what? It was a lot of time that got them to that point. They just didn't wake up one day and say, oh, I want to be the best tennis player in the world. No. That's not what happened. If you watch the story, by the way, which is on Amazon Prime, and Will Smith plays the father. Really good story. I like it. Is it
on Amazon Prime?
Yes. It's on Amazon Prime.
Okay.
It's really good because it tells the work. And that's one of the things I think when we think about our kids, and I think about all my babies in urban education, They look at everything on Insta and think, oh, this is an Insta thing and I can get through this and get it real quick. Education is much bigger than that. And I want our kids to understand that.
Let me share this, and I think you make a good point. When I was a high school principal, and I would get into these conversations with my kids, and one of my first questions was, "Hey, where are you in 5 years? What are you doing? What do you want to be doing?" And the boys were like, I'm going to the league, right? Like I'm going to be that guy. And Shannon is not the dream killer, so I'm not the one to say no, you're not.
Exactly.
But I started asking questions, and this will be my line of questioning, and it goes in exactly in line with what you're saying. Where were you at 5:30 a.m. this morning?
Exactly.
I was in bed. Oh, so you weren't at the gym? You weren't practicing your jump shot? You weren't working out? You weren't doing laps? You weren't doing all the things that need to be done in order to go to where you say you want to be, and you say you want to go to the league?
Okay, exactly.
I hear you. Just know that there's another kid in Indiana and in
at 5:30
that's doing that work. And I think, and again, and this is not to take anything away from the Insta kids. If you're willing to put the time and energy and effort in a real way into whatever your dream is, it's all good. But you got to put the time in. It's not coming to get you. You got to go get it.
You got to go get it. And I'm going to tell you, because my other business and promoting my product, to be on all the social media platforms, promoting the product, it takes so much time. And I actually have to allot 3 hours a day just for social media. So I'm trying to figure if I'm allotting 3 hours of my day to social media to promote my other business and also to promote this business and this platform, that's a lot of time. I mean, so I don't know. I mean, like I said, I think like you said, if it's important to you, then you do it, and I'm okay with that. But okay, so our next slide says, therefore, an academic system that practices educational equity is a strong foundation of a society that is fair and thriving. However, inequity in education is challenging to avoid and can be broken down into inequity due to socioeconomic standing, race, gender, or disability. I agree 100% with that statement, like 100%. And we talk about educational equity is also based on historical context of location, people, and structure. History shapes the outcome of individuals within the education system.
Wait, let's really stay here for a minute, because as we think about the history of individuals within this nation and the history of our people and the economic value of our 400 years of free labor, right? When you start to think about like that, it and we're still to this day, and I think that's a different conversation, but this country was literally, every billionaire in this country owes that money to those that built the infrastructure that we use every day, and that's Black, brown, and the yellow folks.
I agree with you 100%. This kind of stuck to me, and I said, wow, when you talk about history shapes the outcome of individuals within the education system.
But you know what? I'm taking a step further, and I'm talking about my red brothers and sisters whom this land was stolen from, to begin with. We are currently residing on land that was really, that's a different conversation as well.
But. Oh, it is a different conversation. Trust me. I used to have it all the time with my grandmother because she was Indian. Constant conversation. I said, how did an Indian woman marry a white man? Well, biracial man. That was just a whole big thing within itself. And they made it through. But anyways, equity in the classroom means making sure every student has the resources and support they need to be successful. In a equitable classroom, individual factors don't hold back students from reaching their full learning potential. Factors like race or individual experiences. This is where I have a concern, because this is supposed to be the understanding of equity in the classroom. It says individual factors don't hold back students from reaching their full learning potential. Factors like race or individual experiences. How can individual experiences not hold back a student? How is that not possible?
So the language is a little bit troubling for me, but I want to go back to your grandmother, and just we'll come back to that. You know, it'll be like the Christine hour, because you
All
just gave
right.
us so much
The
in that
Christine
single
hour.
sentence. Like,
Mhm.
you know, how does a Native American woman and a biracial brother come together? And now we got you, and so we're gonna come back to that. But so race and individual experiences,
Mhm.
and let's be clear, those are not impediments, right? Things happen. We're born black, but black doesn't mean handicapped, right? It just means that you're
Right.
viewed as such and you're treated as such by the
Mhm.
system that we're in. Those individual experiences, you know, while these may require different supports, these are not handicaps.
Mhm.
And I think that you know, they have to be taken into consideration and supported and accounted for. And I think that individual experiences and race should be reflected in the teachers, in the curriculum, and in the learning experiences that those students have on a daily basis.
I agree. 100%. I agree. And I like the way you frame that.
Well, I mean, it's really culturally like responsive education, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if yeah, yeah, if the education is reflected, if the experiences are reflective of who they're there to serve, kids are gonna do it, right?
Mm-hmm. And so we want to talk about the causes of educational inequality. Unequal educational outcomes are attributed to several variables, including family or origin or gender and social class. Achievement earnings, health status, and political participation also contribute to educational inequality within the United States and other countries. I think the cause of educational inequality, this really kind of encompassed everything that we just talked about.
Um, and let's be clear, I
Do
completely.
you think this should say the have and the have nots? Should it just say that?
So the cause of educational inequality
Hmm.
is systemic racism.
Yeah,
Like that's just it, right? I
that's just
mean,
it.
that's not, you know, and we can talk about the outcomes, but it's um us viewed as other, right? Other than
Yes.
human beings, us being desensitized to being pulled over by the police
Hmm.
and uh, just victimized
Hmm.
at every turn, and almost being desensitized to it,
We
and
are.
seeing it day after day
Yeah,
after day.
we are desensitized to it, and I
Us
agree.
having the little missing 14-year-old girl
Hmm.
that comes up in somebody's Facebook feed once. But if there's someone of another nationality that happens to be missing, then it's national news
It's
until
national.
either that little girl is found or her remains are, right?
Exactly.
And it's just the value of who we're dealing with. And it's playing out in a couple of court cases right now.
I agree with you. I think to your point, what you just said, it comes out in so many different ways, and you're right. If someone of color is missing, it's on Facebook. You don't see it on the news yet. And I think one of the things that I looked at, I think a young lady was missing. I kept waiting for it to come up on the news and for them to consistently play it over and over again until she was located. And I said, why is this just out on Facebook? Why am I not seeing this on the news? And that's very concerning. It's like, what value why is my life or a person of color's life valued less important? Do we not get the ratings? Do you feel that we're not going to get you the ratings we need for your show in order for us to deliver the news
Oh,
feed?
it's not
But
even that deep. We're just not as valuable. It's not
we're
even
not as
worth
valuable.
talking about.
Hmm.
It's not even worth the airtime.
And that's just
It's criminal.
it is. It's criminal,
It's
and
criminal.
I don't like to get emotional, but I'm emotional about that. So when we talk about the main cause and how to change, rising inequality is not a natural or inevitable condition, right? This means we can do something to change it. It happens within among countries. It is a product of policies, laws, institutions, social cultural norms, practices, governance, and deficits, and the unequal distribution of wealth and power. You agree or disagree?
I agree with this wholeheartedly. So I think that we can do something to change it. I think we can do something to change it here. And I think
Right.
that if we change our laws, I think that
Mm-hmm.
if we change the way we look at one another, I think if the way that people change the way they look at us, I think if we change the way we interact, I think that if we change the distribution of power, the distribution of wealth, and we talked about that earlier when we talked about just kids not having access to a technology support system that is adequate.
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree with this, but I will also say that what folks have to realize is that one group kind of coming into power doesn't necessarily mean another group leaving power. And I know that there's a sense of, I don't want to, we're going to make it great again, and
Mm-hmm.
y'all had it for 8 years, but honestly, a rising tide lifts all boats, and
I
um,
agree. I
when
love
you
that.
help those who need the most among you,
Mm-hmm.
you all win.
Right.
All of the systems that are in place to house prisoners,
Mm-hmm.
all the money that goes into that, if you spent a tenth of that on education, we'd have an economy that's booming. And that's for everyone. That's for stockholders, shareholders, Wall Street,
Mm-hmm.
everyone.
I
But
agree with you.
we're thinking about it a little bit differently.
No, but I think too, like, why is it that we think that if one of us or a particular group or comes up, that means another one goes down? Like, I don't understand why people feel that that's going to happen. If we
I
if
can't.
we are all on the same playing field, that means we're all going to be successful. We're all working at the same level. It seems like that would be the environment or cultural concept that's behind all of these things that we're talking about.
Okay, so it goes back to this. Have you ever been on the highway and you put your blinker on,
Hmm.
and the person who was on the right hand side speeds up?
Yes.
That was because they had the perception that you were going to take their spot, right?
Yes.
You're not going to get in front of me and get
Hmm.
to the light first or wherever it is, right?
Hmm.
Ultimately, I mean, that's human nature. We feel like we're
Hmm.
giving something up and someone gets something. But I think expanding your mind and realizing, the pathology that goes into treating human beings like they're not human, because
Right.
when you think, and for those of you who say it's just them or they're less than, there's got to be something wrong with you
Right.
in order to dehumanize an entire segment of the human race like that. That's one thing. But B, you don't lose, you win. You absolutely win when the neighborhoods in your community are empowered, when the schools are of high quality, when there's a highly educated citizenry. We all win.
We all win.
We do.
We all win because we become more productive. And
We
I
do.
hate to say this, but there's so many other cultures who believe in that concept about education that it just blows my mind that we don't feel that way about education. And you see
Yeah.
that in other cultures because I say to myself, we are the largest consumer of import,
Yeah.
America.
Yep.
And I tell people all the time, I said, the phones that we have and everything that we do, are you kidding me? They come from other countries, and we won't mention that country, but that country owns us. They own us. So when you think about education and how you look at making sure everyone has great education, you need to look at other cultures. So when we talk about the budget for education in America, the public education spending in the United States falls short of global benchmarks and lags behind economic growth. So K-12 schools spend 640 billion or $12,624 per pupil annually. Federal, state, and local governments budget 734.2 billion or 14,484 per pupil to fund K-12 public education. Now, this comes from educationdata.org as of August 2nd, 2021. Okay, this is recent data. And my question is this: do you really feel that those dollars are suffice? And I already know the answer to this in helping us close that gap.
So the short answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
But the much longer answer to a question that you didn't ask is you've got like budgeted, 640.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, budgeted 734.
734.
Actual 640.
There you
Remember
go.
I was talking about that fair student funding earlier.
Mm-hmm.
We can say, hey, we're going to educate Johnny at a rate of, or little Jose, or
right.
And the money just isn't allocated, and it doesn't come through to the students that need it most.
Mm-hmm.
And a rethinking of our system of student funding and our per pupil allocation has to absolutely be done. And I'm not mad at Michigan in Proposal A, and I think that they were making strides until the economy tanked after I want to say 2008, and so they ran into some real big shortfalls in per pupil spending. But you always had those districts that were allowed to raise local taxes to add to that allocation. But as long as they were raising the floor, I wasn't mad. But that stopped, and it stopped, I don't know, almost 15 years ago. So we got to figure out something.
We got to figure out something. We have to figure out how to fix this. When we talk about the overall concept of how to promote equity in the classroom, we want to reflect on your own beliefs. We want to reduce race and gender barriers to learning. We want to establish an inclusion environment early. We want to be dynamic with classroom space and accommodate learning styles and disabilities. We also want to be mindful of how we view technology and how we use it in the classrooms, right? Is it to enhance, or is it thinking you can replace? That's my add-on to that. And then 7 is be aware of religious holidays. It's so funny because now that we our educators come from various cultures, I remember a school district saying, oh my gosh, we're going to have to shut down because the majority of our math teachers are from a different culture and they respect Ramadan, right? And I said to them, I said, okay, or the teachers can just pre-record all their lessons and you don't have to shut down school. The school leader in that moment said, oh, we hadn't thought about that. I said, you do have some of the greatest, they're so advanced in technology. I said, so have all of those teachers pre-record their lessons and then just put a paraprofessional in their classrooms, but you can still be taught by your teacher. And they were like, great idea. So I said, you know what? I think I'm worth my weight in gold as a consultant. You guys call me to these strategy meetings about problems you need to solve. I solved it in about 3 minutes. And then I kind of put together the plan and the process in order to do this. I worked with all the teachers across the school district and showed them how to record their sessions, created a private YouTube channel. So not only could you watch it during class, but then you could go to the private YouTube channel and watch it over and over again if you didn't get it the first time. So the lesson to that was I was showing them how to create equity in their classrooms without even having this conversation, right? Because it was necessary and it was needed. So what do you think about those 7 ways to promote equity in the classroom?
I think that they're all a good start.
Yep. It's a good start.
I think that, awareness is step 1, right? But how about actually planning around and taking action based on your understanding of, right?
Okay, you're talking about phase 2, Shannon.
Well, no, I think they're a good start. No, I'm not. Look, everyone needs like baby steps. I'm with you 100%.
If we could get through these 7, I would be like, awesome.
No, I think it's all the first step, and I'm not mad at any of it, and I'm in complete agreement with this as a beginning. And it's a lot of work to do. It's definitely a lot of work to do. So when we talk about overall what's needed in education. Wait,
and again,
go back. I'm so sorry. Go back. Oh, can you go back? Is that a thing?
You want me to go back to the previous?
Just real quick. It'll be brief.
Yeah, that means I have to take it all the way down.
No, don't do anything. Stop. So The second one said reduce.
Yes.
Reduce barriers to gender barriers to learning, right?
Yes.
How about eliminate all, right? So, for me, it's step 1.
Is step 1. Just eliminate it.
Yeah.
Well, first, the first step is try to help them reduce it. And the bigger conversation, and I always say, when we talk about what's really happening in education and how do we support that, is looking at how we can really change how we look at education. And you're right, forget about reducing it, just eliminate it, right? So again, this is like a series that we're going to be doing for the next couple weeks, because it's a much larger conversation, and we're going to have educators on, politicians on, school leaders, students, parents, joining the conversation about educational equity. And so this is just part one in a series that we're going to talk about, because there is a loss to learning, and we need to understand the impact that this is going to make on America. And people keep thinking it's just going to be an impact on just our culture, the minority culture, the brown, yellow, tan folks. It's not. It's going to impact America, because we all play a role in how America functions. So don't think it's not going to impact everyone. It will. And we need to be very conscious and aware of how we approach this. Shannon, what's your perspective?
I'm excited. I'm excited about the conversation. I'm excited that you have created a space for us to have time to really delve into this topic, and really giving it the time and attention that we both know it deserves. So I'm looking forward to speaking to what New York, the most diverse, largest school district in the country, is doing, and I can kind of share some of that.
And I look forward to having some folks from New York come on, talk about what you guys are doing when it comes to educational equity in your school district. And again, we welcome all school leaders, teachers, parents, support, to come on to the podcast and to join us in this conversation. This is a very serious conversation. And the goal is that if we all can work together to create a new common understanding that can be in the Constitution, become part of legislation, we can shift the mindsets of how we think about educational equity. And like Shannon said, it becomes a word of action, not just conversation, not just the pop phrase or word that's being used right now with no action behind it. Our goal of this podcast, which is the Education Roundtable, is to have real conversation about education hot topics. And this is definitely one of them. So Shannon, as always, thank you so much. You know, our conversations, we could go on and on for hours, but this podcast is only an hour. So see you next week. And thanks everyone for joining us for this session of Education Roundtable. We'll see you next week, 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to continue this conversation on educational equity and the loss of learning, part 2.
Have a great week.